Hello everyone, welcome to a video about shield patterns and specifically how to affix some 28mm transfers to your shields to help enhance and make your figures generally look better. This will be one of a number of instructional videos that people will hopefully find of practical value. This is about how I go about the process. Of course, I would expect everyone to take a look at what I'm doing and refine and update to suit their own specific way that they wish to approach these things. Just a little bit of a setup here that I've done. We'll come back to these in a moment. But as you can see here, we've got a range of 28mm shields in various stages of progression, which I will go through in a moment. Probably worth just a little note too about some of the tools that we're going to be seeing today. So I'll introduce them now. A couple of needle files here, generally all round great bits of kit. These are specifically 14cm or approximately 5.5 inch permagrit tools. Obviously feel free to use equivalents or, as I say, make your own way in terms of how you prepare the shields. What else have we got in the toolkit? We've got a pair of pliers, small modelling pliers, obviously always a great help, either for twisting arms, straightening bases, and generally manipulating the figures. I've also got a pair of paper cutting scissors. These are a specific pair that I've bought to be super sharp, and more importantly, it just helps me give the accuracy when we're dealing with shield patterns that we'll come to later. Pair of tweezers, must admit, don't use these a great deal, but they can be extremely useful if you are handling small pieces, and some people use them quite happily when they're manipulating transfers. Pair of snips, which will remove flash and other mould elements from shields and indeed figures in general. What else have we got? We'll come back to the paints in a moment. I've got a larger still Kolinsky sable brush, but this is one, I guess this is maybe a size, it's a size 1, there we go, which is going to be very useful for me when we're manipulating the shield transfers, and generally I'll use this for undercoating and various other bits and pieces that we'll take a look at in a moment. I use a variety of smaller brushes. This one happens to be an army painter brush. It's Kolinsky sable. I've yet to find any artificial or synthetic material that matches the behaviour and properties of sable, but you know, quite frankly, pays your money and takes your choice. Come back to that one a bit later too. Then a little word on paints. We'll see this in a moment, but I use Vallejo Surface Primer Black. I also, at the end of the process, will be using some Vallejo Matte Varnish. I also use some Decal Fix. Oops, just make sure you can see that. Again, there are numerous other products that will stand in place of these. Just really going through the toolkit as to what I'm using. For the purposes of doing some backs of shields, I'm going to be using some Vallejo colours here. Specifically, we've got mahogany brown and flat brown. So that's 984 for the flat brown and 846 mahogany brown. Okay, so where do we begin? Well, we begin with a shield, and what we're trying to do here to begin with is just rid ourselves of any imperfections on the surface, any additional kind of casting metal that's been left on the side, and I'm just going to run around this with the file and get the edges nice and flat. People often ask me, when do you know that your figures are prepped? And how do you prep them? Well, like most things, it's a bit of practice and a bit of hard work. What you're trying to do is get to the stage where you can't feel any obvious imperfections on the shield itself. that it's as round in this case as it possibly can be, and that nothing that you see on the surface will be revealed when you undercoat. Obviously, because this is the surface that we're mainly interested in, I'll concentrate on that, but obviously give the back a quick going over as well. Now, when we're talking about metal figures, people have their own views as to how you prep them. Personally, I now take the figures and any accompanying pieces like shields, I pop them in some warm, mildly soapy water, just ordinary regular washing up soap, give them a swirl around, maybe leave them for a little bit just to get rid of any kind of moulding residue or releasing agent that may have been applied, and then I'll rinse them off thoroughly under usually lukewarm running water with a mixer tap, and use a vegetable brush to agitate the surface. Probably more important with figures, but I do find that it does give a better surface for the primer to adhere to. Once we've got our shield, what do we do next? Well, I take a piece of old card, and typically I actually don't use old card, I use plastic, but plastic or plasticard or an old plastic bag doesn't really go too well on a video. And all we're going to do is take a simple receptacle, give our paint a shake, pop a small amount of paint into the jar, then we're going to take our paint and we're going to paint the top surface. Now, you can try and get around the edges, and that's fine. Don't worry too much if this is a little bit thin, for reasons that we'll come on to shortly. It's not worth worrying too much about that with a shield. And I always paint the upper part first, and that's because depending on how liberally you spread your paint, it will potentially adhere to the underneath surface here, and when we come to do the rear portion of the shield, if we have the concave rounded surface on the bottom, it will stop that second coat sticking to the surface. Just to explain, if we take this one, turn it over, you can see that that's actually proud of the underlying surface. So when we're coating this one, there's no problem with the edge sticking to the underlying surface. Okay. Obviously we allow those to dry. Once you've allowed them to dry, you'll end up with a surface like this. Now, I'm going to paint the inside of the shield first. But I'll just show you what I've done on the other side. I've actually taken, in this case, grey-green and painted on top of the shield. The reason being that these shields are for Etruscan light infantry. Potentially they're a little bit too upper class for those types of troops, but these were ones that I had in the box, and I think they'll make the figures look slightly more impressive. The reason for using the grey-green is that archaeological findings have suggested that that was what was painted on the inside of the shield. Now normally I wouldn't paint the same colour on the inside, I would go for a wood effect. And this is where the aforementioned mahogany and flat brown come in. Because what we're trying to do with these guys, we just swap the paint cover over, is to take again a small amount of paint, take our larger brush and run around the edge of it. You'll notice that I'm not worried too much about spreading the paint around, and that's fine because we're very much in the early stages of prepping the figures here. So again, we will take that, let it dry, and you'll end up with something like this. And this is where we begin to actually spend a little bit more time refining the figure, or in this case the shield. We're going to take our lighter colour, the mahogany brown, give that a tiny little shake, squeeze out some of that paint. This time around we'll take our smaller brush, and just be aware that this is the inside of the shield. So obviously this is the front of the shield, and this is the rear portion. This is a sort of hop-along, the double-handed grip. Because we're going to stick this to the figure on the middle, you can hold the shield quite happily in the middle, and what we're trying to do here is give the general impression of planking. Now, I'm sure there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, but I tend to go top to bottom, i.e. top of the shield to the bottom of the shield, and we're just trying to give it a gentle impression of wood grain. And again, we're not looking to be hugely accurate here because, quite frankly, it's on the inside of the shield. If you want to do more to refine it, feel free. It's a little bit challenging doing this at an odd angle for the camera, but you'll begin to see that that creates an impression of depth and, as I say, of the overall wood grain effect that we're hoping for. Most shields were planked together. I suspect actually they were planked horizontally for strength, and then obviously occasionally covered depending on the type of material. So hopefully you get the general impression of how I go about that, and again we let that one dry. Okay, so what about the front of the shield? Well, if we go back to our original shield, I've left it the grey-green. The first thing to say is the types of shield transfer that I'm using, which are from Little Big Men Studios, really do need a white undercoat. So what we'll do, similar process to undercoating with the black, we'll take the brush, we'll undercoat the surface of the shield in this area here, which I've left sort of marked with the dark brown. But obviously we'll take the white to make sure that we get a good surface to adhere to, and more importantly a surface that will allow the shield pattern to shine through. This is actually 2 coats of foundry white, the top colour in the triad, and this one is the one I've found to be the most suitable. You'll notice that it's not entirely covered. That's fine. We're just looking to gain a good enough surface for the actual transfer to stick to. Well, how do we go about it? Well, you'll find that shield transfers will come in a sheet. This is a sheet that I've cut down already, and we simply take our desired shield pattern and remove it from the rest. Let's take this this pattern here, which looks like a leaping cow or something actually. And what we're doing here is just taking our really sharp scissors and we're edging around it. Now you'll find that you may clip a few edges, and that's fine because for reasons that I'll explain later on. We're going to blend that in. You'll also find that the instructions that come with the shield pattern suggest that you use a modelling knife. Absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. I've just found personally that these scissors are a quicker, more convenient way of dealing with the same problem. Okay, now we've got the transfer out, we'll just offer it up, and as you can see no problem at all with that fitting generally within the area of the shield. There will be times when you perhaps need to adjust the shield transfer to fit, or perhaps be a little bit more generous with the cutting and leave an edge. That's a personal choice. What we're going to do here is make sure that the shield pattern is aligned the correct way for the shield. So again, if we look at the back, you'll see that this one goes front to back. So we've got the front of the shield here, back of the shield here, and we want it roughly aligned in this way. Now, these shield patterns, 99% of the time, are absolutely no problem to take off. You peel off the front transfer back cover, we drop our pattern on. Now, at this stage, you can lift and maneuver the pattern to suit, or the transfer to suit. I'm just going to take a quick look at it. In this particular case, I'm quite happy with the positioning of it, but just to show you, you can lift it and reposition it. Obviously try and minimize that by getting it accurate in the first place. Okay, so now we push down to try and form over the surface. I'll take my big brush, dip it in a little water, and then run that over the surface. You really can't put too much of this stuff on. And we push again. Sometimes you might think I need a slightly more. And again, when it's ready, it's ready. That top cover will slide off very easily, and you'll see that we're left with a wet shield transfer on top of the shield. Okay, now what do I do? Well, very simply, let that dry. Occasionally, I will put this decal fix on immediately after I've put the transfer on. I've never really found any difference between putting the decal fix on now or later, but you will not cause any harm at all by taking some of the decal fix and running it over. And again, you can afford to be fairly generous with this. This will help the transfer adhere to the miniature. Now again, if you read the instructions, technically you're supposed to put that on underneath the transfer. That doesn't really work with these self-adhesive transfer sheets from Little Big Men, but I do find that adding the decal fix gives us a slightly more secure and robust finish. Okay, not wanting to keep you hanging about with that one waiting to dry, I've obviously prepped one here. Now, as you can see, you'll get left with a reasonable sort of line around the edge, which is noticeable. So what we're going to try and do is blend that in. So when we're attempting to blend this particular pattern in, I turn to my foundry triads. In this case, it's a fairly simple process. This is a white shield, obviously. The grey-green edging for an Etruscan shield should probably be black. Quite often they used white shield devices on red, but certainly the black edging is a historical kind of artifact that we know about. So what we're going to do here is have a little look at the foundry triads. Now I use a mixture of foundry, Vallejo and Reaper paints, but I do adopt the triad or base, mid-coat and highlight approach. What I'm looking here for is the most appropriate colour to blend in. Now, I'm not sure whether it's too clear on the camera, but what I actually am probably going to end up doing is obviously using the white, which is a 33C in terms of the foundry code, but I'm not going to do that just yet. This one, which is the 33A, is a little dark for this current state of play, so we're going to use the mid coat for this one, 33B. Again, I'll give it a little shake. You can take the paint out and use a dropper, but in this particular case I'm just going to use the base of the lid to illustrate the point. And what we're doing here is going around just trying to get sufficient paint on to actually start to lose this line. This is a little bit the trial and error in terms of the colour palette that you want to use and the colour that you're going for, but hopefully you'll see that it begins to lose that line. As I say, don't worry if you have to do this a couple of times. What we're trying to do is disrupt the noticeable shield pattern. Sorry, the noticeable outline of the transfer. Dropped a line there, don't worry. You can always repair most things that you do with a paintbrush fairly easily by just using by touching up with the relevant other colour. And we haven't actually painted that yet, so it's going to end up black. Now, you probably will have to do this a few times, especially as I've made, in this particular case, the paint quite thin. But what you might also find a good idea, just to help blend it in, is take a portion of the shield which isn't part of the edge and run the colour up to it. And if we will allow this to dry, quite frankly, that will make the shield pattern disappear. Okay, let's leave that one to dry a moment. Let's show you a slightly different pattern, which is still the same process, but just to give you an indication that you can blend it in very easily. Here's a different shield design from the same set. In this case, I haven't done the black edging, I've done gold, but this is for a cavalry model, a Samnite model. But you can see it's pretty hard to detect any transfer outline, and that's just simply as a result of painting the edges and blending in the colours. Once we've got the pattern to that stage, in this particular case I would paint a black edging, but over here, given that the model is now finished, what do we want to do? Well, this is where we use the matte varnish. We're just going to take that matte varnish and we're going to apply it to the surface. Again, a little bit of a shake of the paint, which in this case is not paint as such, it's varnish. And again, some people like to use gloss varnish, that's absolutely fine. And some people believe that gloss overcoated with matte gives you the best combination in terms of strength, durability, but also aesthetic look when you prefer a matte finish to a glossy one. But that's pretty much the process. Just for completeness, thought I'd show you a couple of different patterns that come as part of the Etruscan and Samnite range. Should just explain that my painting focus has been on Samnites and Etruscans recently. Some of the figures that they'll end up on are these guys. Quite decorative, as you can see, and quite colourful. Those are the Samnites. The Etruscans are somewhat less showy, a little bit more dour, because of the nature of them being lower class troops. Still couldn't bring myself to make them too unattractive though. And we'll come back to how we fix those shields on shortly. But I just thought it was worth showing you a couple of other designs. So these are Etruscan shields, which is technically a spearman shields rather than skirmishers. But again, they illustrate quite nicely what we're trying to achieve with the application of the shield patterns. In this case, these shield bosses will end up being bronze, but again, I've always found it's a good idea to fit those after, to paint the bronze after you fitted the shield design. So if we just take one of these shield designs here, again, you can see it's got a slightly shiny top coating. Get your finger, in this case your thumb, on the edge, oops, and just gently push against the transfer, and you'll see that as I quickly took off the coating with minimal effort. Again, this is actually a little bit easier to line up because we're fitting the aperture across. And again, I've just cut this round in exactly the same way using scissors. The inner piece you do have to cut, but you just create a hole in the middle, cut to the edges, and then take the scissors around each of the sort of sides. And again, we don't have to worry too much about the middle piece because we're going to push it down around it. And oh, voila, there we go. That's another one done. Let's take this red one. Again, the same process. Put your finger on the edge and you can see it there. As I bend it back, remove the film, place where you want it on the shield, get some water across the whole surface, and this, the water is obviously removing the final backing layer, but also helps you with positioning the shield into the correct place. And there we go. Last one as it's here. Again, pull that front cover off really easily, make sure the surface is clear, align the shield pattern or the shield transfer, push the figures, push down as much as you can, reach over for some water, and just repeat the process. Cool. And there we go. And we'll come back to these in a moment and show you how to fit them onto the figures. Okay, so whilst we're just finishing off the shields, let's just put a thin layer of black around here. Various ways that you can hold a shield in position. You can obviously take a brush, hold the surface, which will give you a certain degree of hold. Use the rounded end obviously so that you try and not cause any damage to the surface that you've just painted or covered. But also you can stick a bit of blue tack underneath the shield just to keep it in place and stick on a piece of card, and that's probably the recommended way, because the blue tack obviously keeps it nice and firmly in position, but also raises it slightly proud of the surface that you're working on, and make sure that you don't pick up any pieces that might be lying on the work surface. Now, obviously the more accurate you can get this, the better, but once this is on the figure, we will have an opportunity to rectify any major concerns. And this is a bit of an easier ask because it has got this curved and raised surface. We're not too worried about the edges because we will do those when they're on the figure. Okay, before we let this dry, as I discussed earlier, we're trying to get this white surface blended in. So now I'm just going to shake the Foundry 33C in this particular case and just add to our layer. Trying to make it not too thick but thick enough that it begins to really blend this design in. Given that shields are the showiest bit of the figure, depending on what you're actually painting, but certainly for the ancient armies I tend to concentrate on. If I don't paint the shield patterns myself and I use shield transfers, then I do think it's worth taking the time to make it at least look like you might have done it yourself. and cover up those lines. Again, I'm just carefully going around the edges, but making sure that we don't compromise or override the middle part of the transfer. Now you can see a slight hair there, which is where you may wish to take another drier brush and remove said hair, or if it's going to be a real pain, I think that might be it, we could have used the tweezers. And again, we'll come back to the edges of that when we actually see it on the figure. Okay, so now we come to the slightly tricky process of actually fitting the shield to a miniature. I've, as you've seen earlier, got my miniatures already based. This is something I wouldn't normally do. I just got a little bit carried away painting infantry this time around. I wanted them for a game that I'd arranged. Ended up not painting them in time, but because I tried to cut a few corners, I'd already stuck them to bases and tried to paint the figures in situ. Not recommended, but I did at least end up with some painted figures on bases that I'm now going to put some shields onto. Yes, as I said, I've ended up painting these figures, but I'm still going to go through the process of adding the shields on. The only thing I would say is, obviously, if they're not on their formal bases yet, and obviously they're on the bases that you used for painting the miniatures, that'll make this job a lot easier. Now, this is the shield, obviously, that we've been working on. I've decided to stick it to this figure because I think the white and the black will contrast quite nicely with the red cloak. Reds were a particular colour associated with Etruscans, and similarly with a number of ancient nations. So what we're obviously trying to do is align the figure so that the shield sits like that. Now, these are technically light infantry who probably wouldn't have had this sort of shield, but as I said earlier, it's an army that I've spent a lot of time and energy and effort in painting, and I really want this to look a bit more like a showy army, just to reflect the nature of the people that we're representing. So if we take that off again, what I'm going to do now, which may surprise some of you, is I'm just going to take this arm back to the bare metal, just with a bit of agitation. And I'm not looking to do all of it, but I am looking to create enough of a show there that I'm confident that the glue will adhere correctly. Similarly, I'm going to just take a little line in there. Now, none of this will be seen when we've actually glued the figure, but it just makes me feel better that it's going to create a nice little key for the super glue that I'm going to be using. Without that, I tend to find that sometimes the miniature comes off. If you've done too much, well, I really wouldn't worry about it. That's probably more than I would normally do. But 99 times out of 100, that'll be covered by the figure and the position of the shield. If not, just go over it again with the brown or whatever undercoat you've happened to use. Again, my preferred glue of choice would be the Gorilla Super Glue, and I particularly like the gel because it does help when positioning, particularly shields. It helps to fill gaps, it helps to stay in place without running everywhere and sticking to your fingers. I'm going to give that a little bit of a shake to agitate the glue. Probably try it once or twice just to position the figure and have a look on the inside how it's going to fit. So that, that's quite a nice little fit there. If I have got a little bit of the metal showing through, I'd be surprised, but I can always run in there with a little bit of brown paint. So let's just put a nice blob of glue in the middle there. Again, bit of trial and error as to how much we need. You don't want it overflowing, but you do want enough that it creates a nice little bond there. And we've positioned that on nicely. It's all in Let's leave the figure like that for a moment. Quite often, if I have got figures gluing, I'll use something close to hand and just align it so that we don't lose the shield off the edge. Once you've got the shield stuck, what you need to then do is go round and actually finish off the edging to make sure that that's done nicely. Pick up any imperfections that you may find on the shield pattern. Sorry, not on the shield pattern itself, but on the actual model in terms of overrun, in terms of paint, and just generally give it a good tidy up. Once you've done that, I would seal it again with Vallejo or similar matte or gloss varnish, depending on your preference. And once that's dry, that will then join the rest of the group ready for action. In one of the other videos you'll find on this site, I'll just show you a bit of a showcase of the army once it's all finished. Thanks for your time. Hope this has been of interest and you found it useful. Any questions, just ping us a message and I'll do my best to help you out. Thanks.